think AI is not going to replace people. It's going to replace the tedious tasks. We're still focusing on those exact humans that are doing the work to better serve their clients, their customers, or maybe serve their coworkers when it comes to an IT team, for example. So it's more about eliminating the things that we don't like about our jobs. And I know this is maybe a very common answer, but I truly believe that AI is mostly going to be there to, empower those people, empower the human relationships within a company and with its customers.
Welcome to Pioneers, the show where we explore the intersection between humanity and AI. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. Over the last 10 years, I've built 3 AI startups, written 2 books about the subject, and I run a weekly AI newsletter. I also regularly teach and speak about the topic at conferences. This technology has grown faster than I think any of us could have imagined, and it's making us ask really important questions, such as how ethical is AI? What will this technology look like in a few years, let alone a few months? And most importantly, does it have the power to truly change the world? And what does it mean for you? On this show, I'll be interviewing the founders, operators, and pioneers that are introducing AI into their companies and industries. We'll be asking them the really heavy-hitting questions that make them dig deep into the core of what we do. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel, and today I have a very special guest, Jimmy Iliohan, General Manager at LINKITSYSTEMS. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ankur.
So Jimmy, for our audience, do you mind giving us a brief description of yourself, what you're up to today, and a little bit more about Linkit?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jimmy. I am based in New York City. I moved here 8 months ago. Originally, I'm Dutch, half German, and I have a background in industrial design engineering from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. And in Delft, I was mostly trained to look at innovation through 3 lenses: desirability, viability, and feasibility. We didn't just design products that worked, we designed products people actually wanted, that made business sense, and were enabled by tech. And that's exactly what I started doing at Linkit as well, as a solution consultant. I moved from physical and consumer products more into the world of B2B enterprise software. And what I like about that is that we get the opportunity to make real people's lives a little easier every day. And to give an example of where my passion comes from in this field, I remember working with one of Europe's major freight operators, where an agent was completely overwhelmed, stressed, answering hundreds of customer emails and phone calls every day. And often, instead of throwing more people at the problem, we built portals or solutions or other software to help exactly those kinds of people, so that they spend more time in front of clients, spend less time answering those emails, because often a client can serve themselves. And what we saw with this particular agent after the go live was night and day. She had more time to actually help people. And that's exactly the kind of impact that drives me, freeing up more time for meaningful and human interactions. And that's what we do at Linkit.
I love that. I think a lot of people get caught up in technology, and I realize it's hot, it's sexy, right? Agentic AI, this and that, AI agents and such, which are very topical today. But technology is just an enabler. It supports better business and people and human outcomes. And I think that often gets missed from the discourse. But if you look at some of the most successful AI companies and AI applications to date, it's because they get the human part right. So I'll give you an example. ChatGPT, phenomenal application. Perhaps more people know ChatGPT than even OpenAI or their models, right? And it's because ChatGPT, it's intuitive, it's easy. You just get going, it is magic out of the box. People love that experience. You have other examples like Cursor AI, which Cursor wasn't the first one to introduce coding assistants,
but it made it intuitive, easy, it was beautiful to use, and it's gotten tremendous adoption from developers, right? And I think both of those examples keep the human front and center. So I'm curious, as you're trying to grow this business in the United States, obviously it's a very hot technology, this whole landscape, everyone building in with tech. What critical lessons do you turn to that help guide that approach to getting adoption from business on these net new technologies that are coming online today?
So back when I just started my career, I was always very eager to build, probably a bit too eager. As a young designer, I always wanted to build something new, and I was smart. We had a very smart team, and we could build whatever the client wanted.
Hmm.
And over time, I think I learned mainly two things, which is you don't always solve everything with technology. So even if it's ChatGPT these days or some other AI solutions, sometimes it's also good to go back, look at the actual workflows, look at the actual processes, and maybe make some minor changes in how the people actually work, maybe. And second of all, I think it's good to realize what is out there. So if it's a large language model that you would like to have subscriptions for example, just by buying licenses, and enabling your employees with giving those licenses to those people. I think that's one step. But what's actually going to make it thrive is if you integrate those solutions. And then again, it starts by understanding how people actually work.
When you introduce some of the work that you do with Linkit to organizations, I imagine your stakeholders are both business and IT and technology. How do you kind of help both sides understand how to think about what the success criteria should be working together and then keep everyone focused on the set of criteria that you establish?
So it starts by also teaching technology teams how to communicate the value of their solutions, of their initiatives, of their projects. I think that's often where there may be some misalignment or misunderstanding between these teams. Tech teams start talking tech, business teams start talking about the outcomes and the challenges, and then a technology team is just guessing what needs to be built or what needs to be bought. And it helps by what you pointed out, defining those metrics or those success criteria. That's, I think, where you got to start with whatever new technology initiative you're putting out there.
What are the success criteria that are motivating for the audiences? I know you cover insurance and construction and manufacturing, ocean tech, but I imagine that the themes are either, and at least this is what we see, is that it's like top line enabling. So can you enable more growth, more revenue, product lines, or it could be bottom line, right? Which is, can you reduce expense? Can you save time and effort required of people? And these are maybe just two umbrella areas, but I'm curious what you find to be most motivating across the varied set of customers that you serve.
I think I can answer that question best to solving one challenge within the insurance industry, mostly on the carrier side. I think over the past 10 years, maybe even longer, a lot of their processes have been outsourced to lower wage countries. And the global economy has changed. It's not as affordable or low cost as it has been. And with everything that AI has to offer these days, I think there is a growing demand for becoming less dependent of third-party administrators for claims, for example, or business process outsourcing. Those are, I think, the areas where, in particular, insurance carriers have opportunity to cut costs and maybe improve their customer experience and eventually start generating more revenue because there is a better way to differentiate themselves. If we're all going to the same third-party administrators or PPOs, then how do we still differentiate our actual company, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity for AI to take back control over those internal processes and define the metrics from there, I think.
It's a very interesting point because I think over the years, for example, insurance carriers, they've chopped out things that they didn't want to do as much, and they would offload them to the third parties, BPOs and such. Even gutting out like claims processing, as crazy as that sounds, or it's a critical function, but they treated it almost as if it were kind of like a undesirable thing for them to do. And what it does is it leads to some commoditization of their business at large. Whereas now they're able to bring some of that back in and let that be a differentiator in terms of delivering a better customer experience, right? Developing more empathy with the customer, using that as a point of differentiation. So it is very interesting that this technology is allowing insurance carriers to differentiate potentially in ways that previously they weren't able to. And I think the ones that will win will actually adopt this technology, keep, again, humans in the driver's seat, make the story about them as opposed to about the technology. But they are seeing it as a way to compete and gain new market share, win market share back from players that are treating insurance as if it were just a pure commodity.
And I like that you pointed out the commodity part of, for example, the claims process, because yes, in a way, there is a commodity in this claims process. For a lot of carriers, it will have the same steps, but it ties very closely to other functions within a carrier, like customer service, that are not that much of a commodity, which is more of a differentiator. Mm-hmm. So let's leverage that process to actually be better than others, right?
Yep, that's right. Maybe let's take a step back. I know a lot of people that are listeners to this podcast are thinking through, how do they take this new technology, like all the things that are coming out of AI, and how do they map that to problems that they have at an organizational level, right? And they're like, where do we get started? How do we get started? How do we set ourselves up for success? And I think you and the team that you have done a really good job of shepherding a very thorny technology and adoption of the technology to drive really great outcomes. So could you maybe walk us through a blueprint or template you use in terms of making this a more successful endeavor from the very beginning?
Yeah. I like that you say blueprint, or that you mention blueprint, because one of the methods that we use in finding the right technologies for the right problem, for solving the right problems for our clients, is by using one of the design tools that we have, which is called Service Design Blueprint. You ever heard of it?
I have not.
Okay. It's you've heard of the customer journey, right?
Yes.
So the Service Blueprint leads with the customer journey and then shows what kind of interaction a customer has with your mid-office workers or your back office workers, and how the lines of interactions, what they look like. And if there's maybe additional touch points necessary between your customer and your company, your business. And by mapping out what the underlying processes look like and the systems that support those processes, we scout for opportunities to improve not only the back office process, but to improve the whole customer journey end to end.
I love that, because you're breaking it down and understanding what the end user experience is and working from there. So it's less about the technology, it's about how to use new innovation to go and serve the customer better. I imagine it is harder in more legacy heavy industries, right? Like driving digital transformation. They might not be as like privy to the technology shifts that are happening, like in space and construction or manufacturing. So what type of strategies do you need to use to go and drive what I'd call the adoption of very net new things, like technology that is coming online, like AI, in a space that may not be as privy and open and aware of some of the technology that is out there, given that they operate in what I call maybe slower moving spaces like construction and manufacturing?
Without getting too technical, I think the key is taking an incremental approach. So more incremental strategy. Instead of going for a big bang and ripping out your legacy systems and trying to get all the data from all of those separated systems into one, build a layer on top and just add a few new features so that you can still operate with the legacy that you have, and maybe have an AI agent that structures data, enters that into one of those legacy systems. Could be a better way than ripping out all of those systems and replacing it with one. And I do have an example of this. It was before the actual AI wave, as I would call it, from a Pan-African insurance carrier that we worked with. And they had their policy and claims data living across all kinds of different systems. I believe it were around 5 different systems. So whenever a customer called, an agent had to log into multiple systems, multiple windows, look up their data, see where it comes from. Maybe they couldn't even solve the customer's question, had to refer to someone else. And instead of moving everything into one system, we build a layer on top with some automations, some actions into one interface. That was a significant improvement to their customer experience, because they were helped within a few minutes instead of half an hour or even days.
Given all that's happening on the AI front, do you find the audience that you sell into skeptical of AI? Do you find them embracing of AI? And the reason why I mention it is because I think the moment for adoption tends to be ripe when there is a new technological inflection point that's exciting and cutting edge and maybe captures people's imagination. Maybe there's a little bit of FOMO going on. But I do wonder if, sometimes the hype doesn't live up to reality, and that ends up dissuading audiences from, anything that's like used to be hot, like let's say AI. I'm curious where in that journey you think we are, where it's like, it is encouraging, people are excited to lean in, or are you finding some maybe skepticism, maybe because the hype hasn't lived up to reality? Where are you seeing this with your customer base?
That's an interesting take, or an interesting question, because I kind of see those concerns. You hear the concerns about, for example, data privacy, or what happens after the POC, and all the integration work that happens after then. And I think the fact that so many companies right now are doing POCs, doing those proof of concepts with AI, shows that there is some FOMO, that they don't want to miss out, that they want to start doing this. But the actual concerns come at the end of the POC. Where does the data sit? How accurate is this system going to be? What if 2% of the output is not what we want? Or how does it integrate with all the legacy tech that we still have? I think those are some of the concerns that we are able to tackle, but we still need to do some convincing, I guess, in the industries to make sure that we actually move beyond those POCs and start those pilots and start scaling enterprise-wide.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's also what we see with our customers. There's plenty of appetite to do POCs, and companies are moving from POCs and pilots and production, but that's when the rubber hits the road. That's when things get tough. That's when you need to consider so many things that you didn't have to consider when we were just doing proof of concepts. And it's also unique to regulated spaces or business spaces where there is a lot of sensitivity on the business outcomes that AI is going to affect, right? So if it's a simple, like let's say marketing use case, or maybe email or some sort of outbound use case for go-to-market or content generation, maybe those integration and touch points matter less. Maybe the small percentage of hallucinations doesn't quite matter and impact anything. But the more sensitive the workflow, the more sensitive the space, the more all of this becomes essential, right? And I think that's where things get really tough. And sometimes that's discouraging for everyone involved. Like, it takes far longer and far more involved. But I think what's surprising is that when done well, when it actually works, the outcomes are very motivating. So what I would say is, like, it's worth the pain and the toil because the impact is that substantial, right? It's not like a 10% lift. It's dramatically larger. And so it's worth all that struggle up front to get this right.
Yeah, and you also need to move beyond those POCs to actually start improving the system, right? You need to start building the memory so that the system also learns what a better outcome is, right? So we need to go to pre-production, start gathering more real life data, more real life use cases, so that the system is only improving over time.
Maybe let's kind of flip this around a little bit. I'm curious, like, not only how to drive successful outcomes and have blueprints to go and do that, but what about the opposite? Like, where do you see projects around digital transformation or AI get stalled or struggle or maybe even outright fail? Right? What typically goes wrong when I suppose shit hits the fan?
I'd love to tie it back to, or don't love to tie it back to, but I would tie it back to the way people actually work, right? So I think there's still a lot of misunderstandings with the technology teams that often still lead the AI implementation. And that's not only in the process or in the workflow, but it also, again, ties back to that data. So if there is no real life data, or it takes too long, for example, to gather, maybe not production data, but at least some very realistic testing data, then you also don't get the results that you're looking for. You don't get the business outcomes that you're looking for, and it takes too long. You lose trust. And that's, I think, where an AI initiative may stall.
What about the importance of having good data or sufficient data to drive AI outcomes? I mean, people always say data readiness, data governance, having data in order, kind of getting the foundational pieces together to do AI well. How important do you think good data is in the age of AI?
I think a lot of companies only start realizing just now what it actually means to have good data, because they just start doing these POCs, right? You can, of course, gather the data during a POC and then start testing with whatever you can find. But I think the companies that had already built their repositories, built their databases, have their data lakes in order for 2-3 years ago, I think they are much farther in their AI journey, or much more prepared, much better prepared than the companies that are only just starting doing this now. So you're not too late, but there is an advantage for those companies that had already started this journey years ago.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? If you have your data in order, you're gonna have a leg up. I will say, maybe, and this is like a more positive take, I suppose, is that given how good the foundation models are, you need less data to achieve the same outcomes that you would have, let's say, a cycle ago. So fortunately, it's not too late. If you don't have data in order, you could still get started because you need less data. But it is really important to start assembling good data, because good data will lead to much better outcomes, right? Prompting foundation model only gets you so far, but when grounded with a lot of good data, the models can do far more. And it's also, then you're able to get AI that understands and knows your business and is informed by it, right? So it's much more personalized outcomes, which really do matter. And one of the things that we like to do with our customers is to make sure that that data flywheel starts happening. Maybe they didn't have a whole lot of data. Maybe we're starting from scratch, but during the course of the POC, let's enable the customer to start seeding the data asset and getting more and more data in. So by the end of the POC, maybe before we head into a pilot, you've already started assembling a really good, clean data asset to then build off.
I prefer your take. That's a lot more positive, and I fully agree. I think indeed what you just pointed out, that a lot of these models are already strong enough to function with less data. I think that's become key in, I think, the past year, or maybe a little longer already, but for a lot of companies, so that they can actually start this. So maybe the advantage of those companies that have their data in order is a little less than I expected, right?
But it's surprising, because I think AI's made any, like, what I'd call advantage thinner in nature. So what I will say is, like, AI has now enabled companies to level the playing field, even leapfrog other players that were maybe ahead and dominant in certain ways. So it's a very competitive landscape. All of a sudden, you could go and compete with another player that you thought was 5 years ahead very quickly, because if you adopt AI really well, you can kind of close that gap, right? And so
Yeah.
And I think this is where the biggest losers and winners get shaped is in the next few years to come. How willing are you to really test, try, and adopt AI,
Yeah.
right? The companies that do will be far ahead of the ones that don't. It might not be clear yet, like how that landscape is shaking up, but it will shake out very quickly in the next couple of years. And you will know, like at the end of the day, which ones did a good job of kind of navigating that inflection point and which ones missed out. Maybe to switch gears here a little bit, let's talk about the human element and also organizational culture, because I think those are really paramount, right, to getting enterprise adoption of AI mindsets and things like that. So how do you foster a culture that embraces both AI innovation and the human element within your teams?
So I always encourage the use of AI. I also see clients that don't do that as much, or they just released Microsoft Copilot, or they just released ChatGPT. I think in our team or internal team, we're using AI and mostly generative AI already quite a bit for drafting emails, drafting proposals, marketing, and further down the line in their sales pipeline, for example, but always with a bit of subtlety. I mean, if you look at LinkedIn, this also ties back to the AI fatigue, right? If you look at LinkedIn, I mean, I get so bored by the huge amount of AI generated content that's so clearly AI generated, you know?
Yeah.
I always see when I look at some of these posts or other content, and I see this overly used hyphen, you know, there's hyphens everywhere.
Yeah.
All of a sudden we started using hyphens. Nah, it's not that we are starting to use that. It's because AI is trained that it looks nice, you know? So
Yeah.
how do I foster this culture in our team? I think gets down to the human judgment, right? So yes, we use AI, we use generative AI to create content and to draft those proposals, but the human judgment is key. So whenever we publish something or we submit a proposal, there's always a review process where we make sure that there is some human judgment to keep up the quality of our work.
This is an age-old question, but how do you address concerns, perhaps with your client base, around is AI going to replace human jobs, right? Is that something they should be worried about? And if it is, how do they upskill or retrain, or like what do they do with people as the nature of their roles change because of AI?
I think it's a valid concern, and I would take it very, very seriously. But also in the industries that we serve, so the more traditional industries like insurance and logistics, manufacturing, I think AI is not going to replace people. It's going to replace the tedious tasks. You know, we're still focusing on those exact humans that are doing the work to better serve their clients, their customers, or maybe serve their coworkers when it comes to an IT team, for example. So it's more about eliminating the things that we don't like about our jobs. And I know this is maybe a very common answer, but I truly believe that AI is mostly going to be there to, empower those people, you know, empower the human relationships within a company and with its customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think definitely the starting point is always the stuff that people don't want to do, right? It's an administrative chore and burdensome work. I don't want to rule out, just given how fast AI is moving, how fast the models are getting better, that AI doesn't encroach on things that people do like to do, right? That might also be part of it. But I think humans are generally very adaptive by nature, right? It does take a little bit of a learning curve to go and adapt and find the role of humans in an ever evolving landscape. But I think if you look at multiple technology inflection points over the last 2 centuries, people have found better ways to kind of go and add value in ways that technology couldn't. It's just, I think we're kind of having this negotiation between what is AI capable of doing, where can it be helpful and assistive, but it can unlock a huge amount of human productivity, right? And I think we're seeing that already. I think it's going to shake out. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right in saying that AI is not just like a buzzy thing. It really will change the nature of work, and it already is. So a lot of this is already happening as we speak, and we're all trying to figure out how to incorporate AI and figure out what the role of humans remains or is as the landscape shifts?
Yeah. I walked in New York City the other day and I saw advertising from a company. Forgot what the company exactly did, but they said, stop hiring people, start hiring AI agents. And I was like, nah, this is completely the wrong angle. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
you focus more on what those people that you're still hiring should be doing more, and
yeah.
it's going to be more knowledge work. It's going to be more, less production and more thinking.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the focus, I think.
It's funny you say that about those billboards. I've seen them too. They've been all over SF. I do wonder if that's just a marketing ploy to get eyeballs and attention, right? Like say something that's outrageous.
Yeah. We're talking about it now, right? So
Yeah, exactly. So something's working. Well,
yeah.
maybe let's talk a little bit about international expansion and such. So obviously you have a good read on the European market. You've moved here now 8 months in New York. What are some of the differences that you notice among customers and their maybe risk tolerance for adopting AI between United States and Europe as an example?
Yeah, we've already talked a little bit about those concerns, and I think so. What I've seen here in the US is much more forward-thinking mindsets about using AI. There are more opportunities than there are challenges, it seems. And in the Netherlands, at least, we used AI mostly to build more apps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think we were doing a great job at building a lot of digital experiences in Europe. And we succeeded in creating some amazing digital experiences. However, I think the US market is now preparing to skip a few steps in those digital experiences by eliminating some of the interfaces and replacing that by AI agents. So instead of building more applications, the whole digital experience is shifting from user interface to maybe voice or simpler interaction through email or phone call. And you can get more done through those channels than through a portal, for example. That's a direction it may be heading into, I think. And secondly, I think there are more concerns in Europe also about where the data is, right? So
Yep.
we know AWS and Amazon and Microsoft, they've also been building data centers in Europe, but I think there are still some concerns about who has access to that data, and part of a bigger global politics maybe that they need to start building their own AI capabilities, and they're just not as far as the US is. So
Yeah.
that's holding them back in adoption at scale.
Yeah, it is interesting to see some of the regional differences. They do still persist, right? I think everyone's kind of moving in the same direction, broadly speaking. But I think Europe tends to be a little bit more risk averse and tends to be more
Yep.
concerned about data privacy and security and such, whereas the US is a little bit more, for better or worse, like more of a cowboy attitude, right? Which is like go and take more risk and break things maybe in the process, but not in all spaces. Like I think in regulated spaces, insurance, finance, and healthcare and government, such like it tends to still be very, very different. But I think generally there's more risk taking appetite. But it's interesting that you're saying that the AI is really changing user experiences, right? So I think agentic AI is going to change the way that we want to get things done. So I'll give you an example. I mean, if you look at an iPhone and smartphone as being an experience, that's probably about 16, 17 years old at this point, 18 years old, I suppose. But that's not to say that that experience will be the predominant experience 5 years from now. I think you could see a dramatically different experience. The other day, I was flying from Chicago, or I was trying to fly from Chicago to New York, and I was late to a flight. I needed to rebook a flight. And instead of going through traditional filters and figuring out like what next flight should I take, I should have just been able to ask an AI agent to say, look, I need to get on the next flight to New York. I'd like it to be tonight. I'd like it to be one stop. Like, give me a couple of options, give me prices, and I'll choose one, and then just book me on that next flight without having to go through all the screens and the checkout process. Like, just get it done. Those are the experiences of the future. And can you imagine like that sort of experience everywhere for every single interaction you have? It will dramatically change the way that we actually do things, right? And it's hard to imagine today, but that is where we're headed.
Absolutely. I also want to tap in on UX design, right? Also, the other day I went to an event here in New York about UX design, and I still heard a lot about interfaces, like user interfaces, and it's exactly what you were saying. The experience is moving away from those interfaces to much simpler interactions, skipping a few steps so that we're helped faster in a better way.
That's right. And I think that goes to the other bit with here, which is like you do need cross-department, cross-functional collaboration, which is if you want to design user experience well, you'll need someone from IT and engineering and AI, like all those teams to go in and form the build, but you'll need to talk with product, you'll need to talk with design, you'll need to talk to people that touch the customer, maybe through customer success. And so you do need multiple stakeholders, but you could go from prototype to reality far faster given how enabling, I suppose, this technology really is. And so I'm actually really excited to see how quickly we can not only reimagine user experiences, but iterate on them to make sure that all the user experiences are pristine, right? I mean, you could move and build faster, far better than ever before, and that's massively enabling.
And I think crucial in this cross-functional collaboration is building or hiring the right roles around that function. So I still see companies that don't have product managers, for example. And I think a product manager or a product owner plays a crucial role in bridging departments, bridging teams, so that this solution actually heads into the right direction. And there are other roles as well, or not finding the subject matter expert, or not having an AI engineer. I think those are roles altogether that you need to bridge the gaps between these departments.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like I think there's been some buzz lately around: do you even need product managers, and can engineers kind of figure out and build on their own? And I don't think that's possible. You might need fewer product managers potentially, because maybe some of the documentation and coordination can be assisted through software, through AI. But product management function is about taste. Can you gather good feedback from the multiple stakeholders, synthesize that, and then figure out what to build and what not to build, right? Saving cycles of effort and work. So, it's a very deeply important function to have. But I do think product management as a whole will change in the sense that maybe product managers will be able to vibe code some features and then share that to the engineering team or with the engineering team to have them then take that and then build off of there. So I think the nature of product managers, like their role might change, but the function is a really critical one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe last question here, Jimmy, and really appreciate the time today. What's the most important piece of advice you give to business leaders starting their AI journey today?
One piece of advice I would give to business executives would be to start understanding what AI is and can do, what you need to make an AI initiative successful, because that's where it starts in your journey, right? You need to have that first success. If you don't have that first success, there's no trust. And start small. I think if you have a small team of champions in your organization that is really advocating about your initiative, it's going to spread. Others will ask for the same features. There will be more ideas on how you can leverage AI in other departments, in other functions. And that's the key to success, I guess. So start small, build trust, and expand.
Love that. Well, thanks for the conversation, Jimmy. Really appreciate this.
Thank you too, Ankur. It was a pleasure.